Hi, my name is Demilade Fayemiwo. I have a PhD in chemical engineering, so some people call me Dr. Demi. And if you've just heard that and thought to yourself, what an arrogant introduction, please hang on a few seconds more because you will soon understand why that is important context for this video. I should also let you know that I'm about to brag a little bit more, so just hang in there. Before I did my PhD in chemical engineering, I did an engineering master's and graduated with distinction, even though I did not have an undergrad in engineering. During my PhD, I was selected by the Laurel UNESCO Foundation and awarded a fellowship across sub-Saharan Africa. I was named one of 50 inspiring women in science and tech across Africa. I represented my department at the university's 3-minute thesis competition, which is basically a competition where you take your PhD thesis and condense it into 3 minutes in a language lay people can understand. And I won. I went on to represent the university nationally and came second, but to be honest, I'm not too mad about that. The guy who came first really beat me to it. I also gave a TEDx talk at the end of my PhD on the issues women in science face. I've won multiple awards, I have spoken at different conferences, and even won awards for my very beautiful posters, which I am very proud of. One of them still hangs in the department of the university where I did my master's. But one day I woke up and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And this video is about that. So don't go anywhere. So before I jump into the story of my career, what I do now, how I did my pivot and all of that, I should let you know that I am sitting here with a half-drunk cup of tea, which is purely coincidental. Just when I was settling down to record, I thought, peppermint tea would be so great and refreshing. And you might be thinking, yeah, but you named your channel Let's Have Tea, so are you sure this is not some kind of positioning? I'll let you know that there is nothing related to tea on this channel. I don't know. I love tea, by the way. I'm a tea drinker, but I'm not about to talk to you about the different types of tea. But also, just let you know that the reason I named this Let's Have Tea is because I started a podcast in 2021. It's on Spotify. I named it Let's Have Tea, and the reason for that was just I was thinking of how we often say to ourselves, oh, I have tea for you. Basically, I have something to tell you. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, let's have tea, like let's chat. That's what that's about. But also, when I sat with this very refreshing cup of peppermint tea, which I should take a sip now because I'm running a bit dry. When I sat with this refreshing cup of peppermint tea, it occurred to me that I tend to take my tea without any milk or sugar because I prefer the natural taste of tea. And it doesn't matter what tea it is, green tea, black tea, any kind of tea. I take it without milk or sugar. And that connected in my head, and I said, oh, what a wonderful connection. That everything I'm about to tell you on this channel going forward is not embellished in any way with any sugar or milk. In other words, every story I'm about to tell you is exactly what happened, or at least exactly how I remember it. So in case it turns out someone else remembers it differently, well, sorry, memory is not reliable sometimes, but not intentionally. There is no intentional embellishment with milk or sugar. So let's get into it. I often get questions from people where they're like, Jamie, how did you know what you wanted to do with yourself? Or like, how did you decide to pivot your career? What led you to it? Even the questions I've gotten on the Google form that's under this video, and by the way, you can submit any questions you have under the Google form as well, has also been about how did you know what you wanted to become? How did you know you wanted to do engineering or blah, 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 whatever. So let's get into that story. When I was young, I grew up in a family where my dad had a very heavy influence on my scientific leaning. He wanted a child who would be a doctor. And I'm pretty sure most of you can relate to this, where it's like your parents want you to either be a doctor or an accountant or a lawyer or what's the other one, an engineer. And I'm pretty sure I'm missing out on one, but we know how parents are. Those were basically the careers we were exposed to in our time. It's like you're either this or you're this or you're this or you're this. And somehow, because I was good at science, or should I say I was curious about science, I was the chosen child to pursue this path. So there was a very heavy influence of like scientific exposure when I was growing up. Like my dad would give me books. I remember my favorite books were these books called Teach Yourself. like teach yourself series. So they had like teach yourself calculus, teach yourself mechanics, teach yourself electricity. So all the physics and mathematics things that we had to learn in class, I learned them before class started because those books were very self-explanatory. I don't know why they're not selling them anymore, but I guess the equivalent these days would be things like Statistics for Dummies, which is a great book to have, by the way. So I did that. I finished high school. I left Nigeria because I was born in Nigeria. Left Nigeria when I was about 16. Went to South Africa, sort of like did my final year of high school there, and then went and started applying to university. And it was during that time I found out that as a foreign student, you are not allowed to study medicine in South Africa. So I had to do some quick thinking. And I think this was the first opportunity I had to sit with myself and say, oh, what exactly would I like to be? But remember, I was a 16-year-old child making decisions, and I did not have the self-awareness to sit with myself and say, oh, what exactly would I like to do at this point in time? Or what do I think fits with my character or my personality or my strengths? I didn't even know anything about my strengths. I was just that child where it's like, you throw me into something, I will figure out how to do it, and I will excel at it. That was me. So I ended up choosing biotechnology, and I also had some advice from some people I knew back then who were like in science, and they were like, yes, biotech is the new big thing. So I got into biotech and I started to study biotech. Now I was at Stellenbosch University, which is one of the it's got that X factor. When I was there, I have stories, but let's not go there. But I was at Stellenbosch, and it was great. Towards the end of our degrees, we do a 3-year degree. I don't know if that applies to all universities in South Africa, but we do a 3-year degree, and then you get selected for like a 4th year, which is the honors year. So I was selected. I was one of 10 who was selected into microbiology, which was like it was like an extension of biotech in a way. And during like the prep for this honors year, we were told about like projects and things. I mean, there was a particular project that leaned into engineering, and it was one of those, this is like a mixture of like your natural science and manipulating genes and all of that in biotech, but like feeding it into things like a reactor to produce like economically viable outputs and things like that. And that really interested me. We can have a conversation on another video about how I had a tendency to go for things that were difficult because I felt the need to prove myself. But that's a whole different video. Let's not go there. This is just a career talk. So I did that, finished that, graduated, didn't get a distinction. I was just an average student. And then moved from Stellenbosch to Pretoria, lived there for a bit, couldn't get a job. So I was seeing all kinds of things. I wrote for a website. There was this BuzzFeed-like website. It wasn't BuzzFeed, but it was a website that was trying to be like BuzzFeed. And I had offered to write for them because, by the way, I enjoy writing, and I have a book on Amazon, guys. So I had started writing for them, but they were calling me Demilda. Like, for some reason, they refused to say my name correctly, so I just quit. But there was this other website that I would write, like, for the first phone apps that ever came out. I actually wrote some of the reviews that you might have read, but I was a ghostwriter, so my name was never published. So I wrote articles, I did all kinds of things. I was a tutor. I was just a hustling babe, basically. And during that year, I got invited by the University of Pretoria to do my master's. When I say invited, it wasn't because they discovered me on some database and they're like, oh wow, what a girl. It was because while I was at Stellenbosch, I had applied to do my master's there for the following year, but they had not accepted me. I don't know why. And so that year was the year where I was hustling around town. And eventually they invited me back to say, hey, do you still want to do your master's? If you can get a supervisor, come in. I applied to do a master's in engineering because I was building up on that research that I did. So I did that master's. It went really well. I really enjoyed it. It was a great vibe. Professor was amazing. He and I are still in touch. And towards the end of it, I started getting courted by all kinds of industry players. One of them was, I'm not going to mention them, but basically one of them invited me to a conference where it was getting pioneering young women together and having discussions around like work and things like that, and all the factors. There was even a stylist who came and spoke to us, who turned out to be a bit problematic, but we can talk about that again in another video. But one of the key things at that conference was a strengths coach that they had brought. They had made us take a strengths test before we came to the conference, and this strengths coach was going to talk us through our results. So when I went to the coach and I showed him my results, he said to me, "So what field are you in?" And I said, "Oh, I'm in engineering." I was very pecky because I thought the great achievement was the fact that I was doing this difficult field. Like, yeah, I'm in engineering, and also like I couldn't become a doctor, but look at me, I'm getting a master's in engineering and I'm going to finish with a distinction because by then I already knew my results. And he looked at me and he said, "Really? You are in the wrong field." And I remember thinking, huh? Like, this guy must be really high. Like, I left there just like, oh, please. Like, okay, it's one of those guys who are just like, oh, you can't do this. Like, you know how you're like, my hater said I couldn't get here, but now look at where we're at. It was that kind of vibe for me. I was like, no, this guy's wilding. He can't be right. I left. And I left I didn't leave the conference, but basically left the coaching session with the sense of, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. One thing he did say to me though is that you would thrive in management if you stay in engineering, but the years it would take you to get there will frustrate you. So, because it's not your core strength, you might be good at it, but it's not your core strength. And I guess the thing that I figured out looking back now is just the fact that when you're doing really good at something, it's hard for you to sit back and really assess whether or not that thing is for you. And that was what happened with me in that instance, because I was graduating with a distinction. I was a star student. So why on earth would I feel like this wasn't the field for me? So I left. Left, graduated, got a job, worked for a bit, blah blah blah, did some climate consulting, all of that, and then decided to do a PhD because the jobs I got were not jobs that were on par with the level of achievement I had or on par with what I thought I should be doing, which again was an indication that something was out of balance. So the first sign was this guy telling me, you're not in the right field based on your strengths. And the second sign was this sense of getting into the market and realizing I don't think this is what I want to be doing. Like, when I picture myself in the future and I picture where this field is taking me or where this field has brought me, I don't think I'm doing the right thing. But again, my mind was so constricted to keep thinking that it was because I hadn't achieved enough, as opposed to whether I was just climbing the wrong ladder altogether. It was like, well, you haven't got into the highest height. Maybe when you get to the highest point of it, you'll find something that aligns with you, if that makes sense. So I decided to do a PhD. That was what led me to do the PhD. I got a PhD, I started the PhD, and I started to learn things about myself because obviously at this point I'm getting older, yeah, and I'm becoming more self-aware and paying more attention to my emotions, my reactions to things. And something that started to stand out was the fact that I really enjoyed planning out projects. Like, I'm great at planning a project. I'm great at setting up and even coaching people because I co-supervised a couple of students during my PhD. Even setting up and coaching people on what to do and how to do it. But you see, the lab phase, because I built like a reactor and all of that, the lab phase of it is only enjoyable to me for like the first 3 months. And there is no lab phase that is just 3 months. That's something you should know. I was in the lab every day, well, 6 days out of 7 for 18 months from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I was working 12 hours, like just in the lab. As a matter of fact, the day I got my results out of the thing it was stored on, I don't know, it's like a computer thing that you had to like extract it from. I was literally there extracting the data the whole day. Like the whole day. I got to work at like 7:30 that day because I wasn't doing lab work. And I only showed up in the office again at like 5:30 p.m. And I wasn't doing anything else, just extracting data. So that's how much work that I did. So I realized the first 3 months, I'm like, yes, I'm looking at the results. This is great. But anything that followed, I was completely burnt out. Something else I enjoyed doing was analyzing the data and trying to tell a story out of the data. But obviously I had to go through the lab phase in order to reach the data analysis point. So all of these things started pointing out to me. So that was again like an indication of I really wonder what this is, right? Because if I'm going to be a scientist, I can't really escape the part of the lab. Like if I was going to be a research engineer, for example. But I wasn't really sure what the problem was. I graduated, I got a new job, I was working, I was science research lead, and I was also doing some teaching. I actually was teaching biology, which is how I got to fall in love with biology again, because before then I was like, boring. Um, and during that time, also doing lots of reflection. And I think it really helped that I was working. Don't take this the wrong way. It helps that I was working in a very toxic place, because all I thought of every single day was how I was going to get out of that. Um, so yeah, there was just this sense of like discomfort that I had, and I felt like I had chosen the wrong field. By the time I completed my PhD, even with all those awards I mentioned at the beginning, now you realize why I mentioned them. There was just a sense of I am not doing the right thing. Like this doesn't really align with my, like it doesn't align with my strength. I can do it because I'm that person where you throw me into something and you say figure it out. I will figure it out, but it doesn't mean I will enjoy it. Like I'll burn out very quickly if it's something that's just not for me, but I'll figure it out. That's the one thing with me. So there was a lot of reflecting and thinking about, okay, what do I do? How do I do this? What exactly should I be pursuing? What should my career be? And things like that. And so I'm going to pause the story here a bit just to let you know that the reality that I figured out in retrospect is that you can never really know what you're meant to do until you've got into a certain point in your life. For those who have asked me, how do you know what you want to become? It's very difficult. I think it's something where you really have to go through, well, in some cases, you really have to go through what you don't want to be to figure out exactly what you want to be. And I know there are different kinds of people with regards to this. There are people who wake up and they're like, this is what I want to do, and they're very sure about it and they go for it. And there are people who are very sure but actually turn out to be wrong, e.g. me. And there are people who are just like in life and they're like, I don't know what I want to do with myself. What exactly is going on? Where are we headed? Why are we doing this? So different camps of people. And the point that I have learned is just that you never really know until you grow. And I'm not trying to be a rhymer, but you all need to applaud me for that, because come to think of it, yes. Never really know until you grow. Yes, girl. That's I can be so weird. Oh, I need a sip of tea. You never really know until you grow. So the way society is structured, and one of the books that I read really spoke to this. It's a book called Range by David Epstein, not Epstein. David Epstein wrote a book called Range, and that book validated me. Part of the argument in the book is basically the point where you are asked to make a decision as a young person about your career, about your life, about what you want to do with yourself. At that point, you don't really know yourself, right? Your decision is probably going to be based on the environment that you're in, on parental influences, and on all kinds of things. And so you choose based on that. But as you grow older and grow into yourself and grow into ownership of like your strengths and your weaknesses and things like that, and even your personality, you realize that actually maybe this doesn't fit. Or you might be lucky and realize, oh, this is a perfect fit, and you're happy. So for me, that was me, right? I grew up thinking, oh, I know what I wanted to do. But by the time I really got into it, I realized I can't do this for the rest of my life. I would literally walk out of my skin. Like I'll peel my skin off and just walk. I don't know, muscle naked, if that makes sense, and just go, because I couldn't stand it. So eventually I had to do some digging. That required me to even go to therapy. And I remember going to my therapist and telling her, like, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like an imposter. Not because obviously I'm an imposter. I had all the proof that I was doing great work. But it was just that sense of I am betraying myself. Like there is a different dream that forms in my mind when I think of my future, and does not align with this dream that I am in, like with this reality rather that I'm in. So I had that conversation with her, and she prescribed some self-reflection and outlining like the strengths and everything. And I remember I went digging for my strength test, which by that time was about 5 years old. I went digging for that test because I kept everything in the folder, never thrown it away. I went digging and I started to read through all of the strengths that had been identified as my top five. And I think I broke down into tears because it suddenly hit me that when that man was telling me the field you're in is not for you, it was because he really saw the potential of what I could be doing with myself instead. But I had ignored that and told myself, oh, the reason why I'm not happy yet is because I haven't reached the top of the ladder. My biggest advice to people nowadays is don't go climbing a ladder to the top if you don't feel fulfilled halfway. And the reason I say that is because if you're not feeling fulfilled and you keep climbing to the top, hoping that the top is where the fulfillment is, you're already doing the wrong thing. You want to be climbing a ladder where you might not have everything you need, but you have a sense of fulfillment in the fact that it aligns with who you are and what you want to be doing. So there is no struggle within yourself where it's like, should I be doing this? Oh my God, or I could be doing that. Before I changed my field, I would sometimes sit up and think of all the other 10,000 careers I could be doing. I'll sit up and think, oh, I could become a nail technician, or I could become an esthetician. And I know I'm just mentioning these things, but that's because I really love like skincare and things like that. I don't do my nails though. But I would like basically just sit and be like, oh, I could be an industrial engineer, because again, I wasn't fulfilled where I was. So everything looked appealing. And also because of my nature where I'm like, I can figure anything out, everything looked appealing. But the moment I recognized that I had climbed the ladder that I did not have any business climbing all the way to the top, and I had many opportunities to change my career, to be honest. I remember I even got like a link from, what's that thing? Is it Schwarzman or Schwarzman? I don't know how you say it correctly. Scholars. And it was like, yeah, you can apply for like a policy program and things like that. And I thought to myself, yeah, but like, what would I do? You know, I didn't dig deep into it because my mind was just so constricted on that messaging I'd received as a child that I had to go in a specific way. I had to be a scientist. I had to prove I can do difficult things. I had to prove this and prove that and prove that. And I mean, even after I had proven it, it still felt like there was more to keep proving. Eventually went through all of the strength test results, read them over and over again, then spoke to a friend who happened to be a strengths coach for the exact same test. This was a coincidence. She was a colleague actually. I just mentioned to her, I was like, oh, I took this test and these were my top five. And she said, yep, I agree with that. Like, I can totally see how that is you. And it really was like 5 years later, the results still aligned. I decided to take the test again, got the same results. So I said, you know what? I need to figure out what I can do with these top five strengths. And what is it that I would enjoy? What interests me? I noticed when I was putting my PhD thesis together, there was a focus also on like the government angle. Like what role should governments play? Because I was working in water treatment, and that was one of my most enjoyable chapters. I also had a chapter on economic viability of the reactor I had designed, and I enjoyed that chapter. So when I put all of those things together, I figured, oh, actually, I need to go study something along the lines of public policy. Public policy is a lot of problem solving. It's a lot of thinking and digging deep into problems, and also applying a scientific lens can be very helpful. So it wasn't me trying to discard my scientific identity completely, but thinking about how I could take that and pivot it into something new. So that was what this was all about. The whole story around that is just, I don't know, it's my favorite story, and I think I can do it in 5 minutes. But basically applied to Harvard in 2020, got rejected. No surprises, my application wasn't that great. And then the pandemic came, obviously, we were all locked in, we were not going anywhere. I was depressed. My workplace was super toxic. I was just trying to run away from there. And then towards the end of 2020, I believe, I saw an ad for a, what's it called? A Gates scholarship. It's like a Gates Cambridge scholarship at the University of Cambridge in the UK. And I thought maybe I should apply to Cambridge. Not that I thought I would ever get in, but I was like, why not? If they reject me, I will be exactly where I am right now. Like nothing's gonna change, and if it doesn't get worse than this, I can live with it. So I'm going to apply. So I submitted my application to that. Uh, and I had indicated in my application that I wanted to be considered for all scholarships, but I was applying to the Gates Cambridge scholarship. And then 2 months later, I got an email that said I got into the public policy program at Cambridge. And I was like, hey, I got in where? So that made me think, wait a minute, if I can get in at Cambridge, maybe I can get in elsewhere. So I decided to apply to Oxford because you have to do the whole thing. You have to do the Oxbridge complete application, yeah? So I put together an application which I thought was much better because I really was like, oh, it seems like I have something here that I can actually put out. So worked on that application, sent it to Oxford, and I got in. Sent an application to LSE, and I got in. And I was like, what is happening? But obviously there was the issue of how are you going to pay for this? I remember my therapist and I were like going through all the different ways I could find the money. Cambridge and Oxford are not cheap. LSE is better, but not cheap either. How was I going to find the money to do this? And I remember when we had exhausted all the viable options, she said, well, I guess the next thing is you have to become a drug dealer because this is something you're excited about. But obviously I wasn't going to become a drug dealer. Oxford didn't give me funding. I was very sad about it because that was the first funding decision that came through. And I thought I would be sad. I was sad, but I thought I would be really sad, but I wasn't as sad as I would be. But that links to a completely aspect of life. It links to like my beliefs and religion and things like that. LSE, because I applied a bit late, there was no way I could be considered for funding. And days just went by, weeks went by, months went by. And one evening in July, I was sitting at home and just thinking about my life, depressed. As a matter of fact, I was lying on the couch, I remember. And I heard a beep on my computer and I thought, oh, who's emailing me now? So I picked up my phone to check what it was. And it was an email, and the title, the subject said, offer of a Cambridge Trust scholarship. And I remember I threw my phone on the floor, jumped out of my seat, because I thought I was dreaming. There was no way this was happening. And I read it again, and they were like, if you can submit a recommendation letter by this time, I think it was 3 recommendations, and I had like maybe a week or so to get it done. And then it's subject to some approval, blah, blah, blah. Like it was just a whole lot. But I was like, okay, I'm going to do this because the program was starting at the end of September. I was like, okay, I'll do this. So did everything, and eventually I got a confirmation about 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later saying you've been offered this and you're coming to Cambridge, you don't have to pay anything. We'll cover your fees, we'll even give you a stipend. And I think the big thing that stood out for me there, I mean, obviously I can tell you this whole story about like just opening up to life. But the big thing that stood out for me there was just something that I read in, I think it was in Range by David Epstein, that a lot of the time people don't want to take a chance to pivot their careers because they are afraid of what will happen. When I was applying to Cambridge and I was applying for funding, I remember telling my therapist, I don't see any reason why these guys would give me funding because look at all my achievements. Look at my PhD and all of these things that I have. Why would they look at me and say, yes, let's give this person funding when they are probably people younger than me who also need to study their masters and get funding? But it turns out that didn't matter at all. What I needed was just to be brave and to put myself out there and be willing to get hurt. Because again, remember what I said. For me, I just felt if it doesn't work out, I will still be here. And if I'm still here and it doesn't get worse than this, I can live with it. What I will not be able to live with is if it gets worse than this, like this feeling of not being connected to what you do and just feeling burnt out and feeling the need to escape all the time. So yeah, to answer your question, how do you know what you want to become? Again, you don't know until you grow. You go through life, you learn your lessons, you interact with people, you get exposed to more things and more fields. And I think the big thing for me that I really took out of it is that there is no need to craft your life into a single path. You can live many you can live many lives in one lifetime. You don't have to say, my life is designed just so I am an engineer, all my life is designed just so I am this or I am that. You can always pivot your life. What you need is the bravery to do it all the time. And every pivot makes your life better. I now work in public policy. I'm a climate policy advisor. I love my job. I don't feel any need to escape from it at all. I wake up every day and I feel like, I mean, besides physical exhaustion, maybe when it's just like, oh, it's so hard, oh my God, or it's really busy. But the job itself, I enjoy. I also have an aspect of diplomacy to my job, so I work in a diplomatic network. And it's just really enriched my life to the sense, to the point where I'm like, I have job satisfaction, it aligns with my strengths, and it even helps me improve my weaknesses. And that's something that I really, really love. But I've also learned to not be weakness focused. So as long as my strengths are amplified by this job, I'm happy. So I really love what I do. And again, just that sense of like, be willing to go through life and consider it discovery. If you're someone who's like, oh, I'm not really sure of what I want to do, I don't really know what I want to do, whatever it is that you're doing now, continue with it. That would be my advice. Continue with it. Keep doing your best at it, but also be willing to open yourself up to other opportunities. Something that happened at the conference where I met that first strengths coach was one of the female CEOs in South Africa had come to speak. And something she said stuck with me till this day, and that was, do not be too attached to what you studied, because life will take you on different adventures. I think she had studied banking and now she works in IT or something interesting like that. But basically, she had done a whole pivot herself and now runs a very successful company. And so the sense of that thing of like, your life is not constricted to whatever identity you crafted for yourself as a teenager or your parents crafted for you, nor is your life tied to um, a sense of linearity. I think that's the best way to put it. Like, it doesn't have to be this linear journey where you're just heading or like going just upwards. I like to call it climbing sideways. There's some times in life where you get to a certain point and you realize, I don't think I'm going to enjoy going higher. I'm just going to go sideways and continue climbing on that ladder. And that's something that I've done and I've really enjoyed. So yeah, I don't want to keep dragging this out and just like repeating things. But big thing is, keep going through life, open yourself to new opportunities. If you get an opportunity to do something that's not even in line with what you studied, say yes. I will tell you that one of the jobs I got before I started my PhD was as a consultant on a climate change project. And I had not done anything related to climate change. But I told myself, I will learn it and I will figure it out and I'll present the reports. It was for a government consultancy. I'll do the reports, I'll do everything I need to do. And I just went through that. That ended up being the foundation of the career that I have now built. That report that I wrote with colleagues, where it was like a climate change compendium on adaptation and technologies and things like that, things that I did not realize in a few years would become highly significant, laid the foundation. So be open to any opportunity, be open to learning, be open to saying, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to figure it out. Except obviously it's something that you're absolutely not interested in, then don't bother. But if it's something you feel like, oh, this seems interesting, I just want to try it out, please do. And also be kind to yourself, okay? Be kind to yourself. Don't think, oh my God, because I haven't figured it out and it seems like everyone else has, then I am behind or I don't know what I'm doing with myself. That's not true. I'll tell you that when I decided to go and study public policy, considering I had a PhD, there were people in my life who were like, are you crazy? Like, after a PhD, you really sound confused. But I also had friends who were like, yes, they may go for it. And those are the friends to listen to. The ones who tell you to go for it. Go for it. Fortune favors the brave is a real statement. Go for it. Your best life is waiting for you at the end of this chasm between the reality you're living now and the dream you want to achieve. So take that leap forward and do your best. And sometimes, I'm not saying that every leap will work out, but even if it doesn't work out, your life will not be worse than what it is. So literally saying you don't have anything to lose by taking a chance on pivoting your career. I did it and I'm super happy, and I really hope more people jump on the bandwagon. If you have any questions you want to ask me, please, you can post them in the comments or you can send them to me on the Google form. If you want to pose a dilemma or something, there's a space on the Google form where you can write your heart out. Seriously, and I'll read it. So yeah, thank you all so much. I think that's the end of this video, and my peppermint tea is gone cold, so yeah, I have to warm that up. All right then, have a good time and goodbye.